Herr Stolz looked formal as he waited, sitting up straight, holding his tea. The Stolzes normally only heated the kitchen, but tonight the living room with its mahogany furniture was warm, and it was filled with the good smells from the kitchen and from the Christmas tree. "They're accepted, mostly," Elder Thomas said. But then he admitted, "Once I heard my father say that some people wouldn't shop at one of the stores in the city because it was owned by Jews. That's the only time I've ever heard anything like that." "I see. And what do Mormons believe about Jews?" "They're children of Israel, like us," Elder Meekum said. Herr Stolz took a long look at Elder Meekum. He was a barrel-chested man with bulky arms, but his facial features were delicate, and he had probing eyes that were intensely blue. "Excuse me?" he said. "What makes you children of Israel?" Elder Meekum glanced at Elder Thomas, apparently aware that he had gotten in over his head. Elder Thomas cleared his throat, and then he spoke for Elder Meekum. "We believe in the gathering of Israel, prophesied in the Bible. When Gentiles, like us, accept the gospel, we are adopted into the tribes of Israel. So you see yourselves as brothers with the Jews." "Yes, you could say that." Herr Stolz thought for a time, and then he said, "Don't say these things to others. And don't ask Germans what they think of Jews." He leaned forward and looked at Elder Meekum. "You are putting yourselves in danger when you bring up such issues." Elder Meekum nodded. "Heinrich, it's Christmas. Let's not talk of this," Frau Stolz said. She was an attractive woman, a little thick in the waist and worn-looking around her eyes, but the contours of her face were flawless, as though someone had sculpted her. She was warm, too, not so skeptical as her husband and daughter. "It's best only to say this," Herr Stolz said. "Hitler has done much for Germany. We have much to thank him for." "Papa, don't say that," Anna said. "They'll think it's what we believe." She was looking at Elder Thomas, not at her father. Elder Thomas was surprised. He thought Herr Stolz had told them what he believed. Herr Stolz said calmly, "Anna, I doubt I believe in much of anything." "It's not true," Frau Stolz said. "He told me only yesterday that he finds something genuine in the two of you. It makes him want to believe what you teach." Herr Stolz laughed softly. "Well, now, don't give away my secrets. Let's sing some more now. Let's enjoy Christmas. Yes, in a moment, Frida." But then he said, "My friends, I will trust you. I want to tell you what I feel, in reality." "Don't, Papa," Peter said. He suddenly sat up straight. "It's all right, Peter, I need to say this." He looked back at Elder Meekum. "I know it's difficult for you to understand what's happening here, but you have to know our history. The Treaty of Versailles at the end of the World War reduced our boundaries, and the reparations we had to pay made economic recovery impossible. People struggled even to put bread on their tables. And then along came Hitler, who offered jobs, who told people to take back their pride. He's rebuilding the military in defiance of the treaty. He justifies his actions with grand speeches, puts on magnificent parades, which the people love, and he tells Germans that they are superior to all others. I suppose that's something everyone likes to hear." "He also takes away your freedom," Elder Meekum said. "Yes, of course. Hitler is an evil man, a liar. Make no mistake about that. There is nothing he will not do." "No wonder people are scared," Elder Meekum said. Herr Stolz looked from one elder to the other. "Yes. And now I have put my life in your hands. If you were to tell anyone what I have said, I could be arrested. My children have not joined Hitler Youth. That already makes me suspect. There are those, I'm certain, just waiting for me to make a mistake. And you could be in equal danger for listening to what I have said." "We won't say anything," Elder Meekum said. "You must also know that Hitler is moving Germany steadily toward war with England and France, and in time with America. You and I, my friends, are destined to be enemies." Elder Thomas didn't want to believe that. He always thought, somehow, the Germans would see through Hitler. "Elder Meekum and I will never be your enemies," he said. "It's Christmas," Frau Stolz said again, and she patted her husband's arm. "Yes," Herr Stolz said, "but let me say one last thing." He looked at Elder Meekum. "As you form your judgment of the German people, think about your own land. You wonder about the attitude toward Jews in Germany, but ask yourself about the way you think of Negroes and Indians in America. Ask yourself whether you see yourselves as superior to these people." Elder Thomas had thought of this before, had seen the parallel, but he saw the surprise in Elder Meekum's face. "We don't—" But Elder Meekum seemed to think better of what he was going to say, and he stopped. I'm sorry. Enough of this. Do either of you young men play chess?" "I do," Elder Meekum said. "I'm not very good, but I play." "It's all right not to be so good. I like to win." Herr Stolz got out the chess set, and he and Elder Meekum walked into the kitchen, where they seated themselves across the table from each other. Peter went with them to watch, and Frau Stolz and Anna picked up the dishes. Elder Thomas was left alone, and so he decided to join everyone in the kitchen, but Anna came back just as Elder Thomas was getting up. "Papa has never said those things to anyone but us," she said. "He trusts you." She sat in the chair where her mother had sat, across from Elder Thomas, and he sat back down. He hoped that Frau Stolz would return soon. Even though the door to the kitchen was opened and Elder Thomas could see his companion, he felt a little strange sitting there alone with Anna. "I won't break your father's trust," Elder Thomas said. Anna smiled and said, "You always do the right thing, don't you?" "I try to do what is right." With Anna, a smile was always close, flitting into her eyes or appearing as a little arch in her lip. He never knew when she was teasing him, or whether she always was. She had a face like a porcelain doll, the curve of her cheekbones perfect, and eyes almost too blue to be real. Elder Thomas knew that he shouldn't notice all this, but he told himself, she was only a pretty kid, the same age as his little brother. "I think I'll watch the chess game," he said. "I'm sorry, I was only teasing. Don't go." Elder Thomas sat down again. "So what do you and Bruder Meekum call each other when you aren't here with us?" Anna asked. "Bruder. Or Mitt, short for Mitarbeiter." "Don't you ever use your Christian names?" "No, it's part of respecting each other. We have to remember we're missionaries and we have a sacred calling." She was still smiling, although she actually seemed to be trying not to. "So what is your given name?" "Alexander," he said. "My family calls me Alex." "Alex," she repeated. "Alex." She said it, and it sounded better than it ever had before. "I like that name." "Why don't we see how Bruder Meekum and your father are doing?" Elder Thomas said. "Yes, all right, Alex." "Don't call me that. I'm not supposed to—" "Oh, don't worry, I won't." But she was still using her eyes to tease him, and he could tell that she knew how pretty she was, and how awkward that made him feel. As Elder Thomas approached the door to the kitchen, he heard Herr Stolz say, "What do you mean? Who has been following you?" It was another subject Elder Thomas didn't want to talk about. But now Herr Stolz had turned to look at Elder Thomas, and the question had become his. "We're not sure," he said. "Sometimes we see a man outside our apartment. You must tell your leaders. You should leave Frankfurt immediately." Elder Thomas didn't know how to respond, so he said, "Maybe I can talk to our mission president and see what he thinks." Herr Stolz pushed the chessboard aside. His eyes looked clouded, thoughtful. Finally he said, "I'm sorry, but it would not be wise for you to come here again. I must think of my family. We can't be drawn into this." "No, Papa," Peter said. He stood up, stepped to his father, and put his arms around his shoulders. "They're our friends." "I know. I'm very sorry." Elder Thomas nodded. "I understand," he said. He wanted to offer some argument, but he could think of nothing to say. "Oh, Heinrich, is this necessary?" Frau Stolz asked. She was standing across the kitchen near the sink. She had clasped her hands together, and Elder Thomas saw tears in her eyes. "Maybe it's better, for now," Elder Thomas said. "Maybe later, when we're sure we aren't followed, we could call on you again." Elder Thomas glanced at Anna and saw that all the playfulness was gone from her eyes. She looked shocked. "Yes, maybe a little later," Frau Stolz said. "It's not just for us, it's for you," Herr Stolz said. He stood up and Peter stepped aside. "You need to go back to America and get away from all this. It would cause us great pain if something happened to you." "I know that," Elder Thomas said. He and Elder Meekum got their coats and then shook hands with everybody, and all the Stolzes apologized and wished the elders well. As Elder Thomas walked out the door, he glanced back and caught a glimpse of Anna. The shock was gone from her face. What he thought he saw now was sadness. The missionaries hardly spoke as they bicycled home. As they turned the last corner and coasted to a stop, Elder Thomas looked up and down the street, but the street was empty. The elders left their bikes in the courtyard out back. When they reached the room, they found it very cold. Elder Meekum built a fire in the coal stove, and then he got out his scriptures, placed them on the table, and sat down across from Elder Thomas, but he didn't begin to read. "What was your family doing today?" he asked. "I don't know. They're taking their presents back, probably, trading everything for the right sizes." Oh, I don't mean today. I mean yesterday. It still seems like Christmas to me. Elder Thomas wasn't sure this was a good thing to talk about, but he told Elder Meekum. In the morning, everyone gets up early and goes downstairs to see what Santa brought. What do you do after the presents are open? The kids play with their new toys, and Mom scrambles up some eggs. She's always telling the little girls not to eat too much candy before breakfast. Mothers must go to the same training school. They all say the same things. Elder Thomas laughed, and now he was seeing the whole picture, the little girls on the floor in their flannel nightgowns with their new dolls or playhouses, Wally and Jean figuring out a new board game, Mom fussing around the house, telling Bobby that her new sweater will go just perfect with her tan skirt. My big sisters were quite a bit older than me, Elder Meekum said. They've been gone from home quite a while, so I remember mostly the years with my little brother going wild with a toy truck or horse trailer, and my little sister telling him to quiet down so her doll could sleep, and Mom saying, "Now kids, let's not have any fighting today, it's Christmas." Elder Thomas nodded. He felt the nostalgia seeping in from all sides. He also saw it in Elder Meekum's eyes, and he tried to think of a way to cut this off. So he opened his Bible and began to read. But he still had a picture of home in his head, and he couldn't concentrate. He wished he could be home for a few hours, long enough to hug the little girls and Mom and Bobby, throw a ball around with Jean, and maybe have a talk with Wally. He always had the feeling that he wasn't as close to Wally as he really ought to be. Elder Thomas looked up after a time, and he saw that Elder Meekum wasn't even pretending to study. He was staring straight ahead. "Are you a little homesick tonight?" Elder Thomas asked. "Either that or my insides are turning to clay." "Is it that bad?" "No, I'm all right." "Are you sorry you came on your mission?" "No, I just wish I could catch on to the language. I wish the Nazis would go away. I don't like watching what I say." "What if Herr Stoltz is right? What if we end up in a war with Germany?" "Well, that won't happen. The Germans won't let Hitler take things that far. They're going to stop him one of these days." Elder Thomas got up and walked to the window. He looked at the corner lamppost and the circle of light around it. But he was much more aware of all the darkness beyond the light. "I hope you're right," he said. Chapter 4. Another gray day, and cold. Elder Thomas always had branch work to do and members to visit, but he and Elder Meekum tried to tract every morning for 2 or 3 hours. On such cold days, they wrapped themselves up in all the clothes they could get on, long johns, sweaters, overcoats, scarves, hats. Inside the apartment buildings, out of the wind, they trudged up steep flights of stairs and got sweaty, but back on the street, and especially on their bikes, the damp cold cut through everything, and the elders wished they could pile even more layers on. It was almost noon this late January day of 1939, and the hours had crawled by with no success. The Hausfrauen would peek out of their doors rather than swinging them wide, and then they stayed back in the shadows in their dark house dresses. Their noses were often all that poked out, perhaps their red cheeks. And in this poor section of town, they showed their browned or missing teeth as they barked, "Nein, nein, keine Zeit," and pushed the door shut in the elders' faces. The missionaries held out their tracts, tried at least to get a little information into the homes, but more often than not the women refused even that. The sky, the apartment buildings, the street, everything seemed to have blended into a seamless drabness, like a slab of concrete. "Let's buy our lunch today, get something hot," Elder Thomas said. But Elder Meekum was looking down the street. "What's going on down there?" he asked. "A Nazi parade. The local party is putting it on. You've seen all those handbills posted around town, haven't you?" "Oh, yeah," Elder Meekum said. "I didn't know it was today. Let's go take a look." When the elders reached the corner, they could see that the parade had not arrived, but a crowd had gathered. "Let's cross the street," Elder Thomas said. "We can stand in that park and stay back from the crowd." So they crossed the street, and once they were behind the people, back on the frozen ground of the park, no one paid attention to them. They kept their backs to the breeze and tucked their hands deep into their coat pockets. "I hope they bring out their big panzers," Elder Meekum said. "They'll have some." Elder Thomas had seen plenty of these parades. Hitler loved to keep his armies in front of the people, and local party leaders looked for any excuse to display military weapons and spit and polished troops. Red Nazi flags with the black hooked cross, the swastika, were draped from the buildings and hung from lampposts all along the street. In a couple of minutes, Elder Thomas saw the people along the parade route begin to raise their arms. The flag was approaching. "I'm not doing that," Elder Meekum said, but he glanced around to see who might be watching. Elder Thomas began to raise his arm and then decided he wouldn't do it either. No one was looking back. The people were stretching their arms, standing at attention. Elder Thomas saw the pride Herr Stultz had talked about, people who wanted to take back their national pride. This is crazy. I can't believe these are the same people we see in the marketplace. They've got fire in their eyes. Elder Thomas could also see the thrilled faces across the street. After the flag passed by, people dropped their arms, but they began to shout and wave as the black-uniformed SS troops tromped by in their perfect lines, their legs rising in exact unison. After the SS passed, several big trucks followed, filled with stormtroopers in their brown shirts and swastika armbands. They sat in rows looking straight forward, with rifles held up right in front of them. Women in the crowd had begun to wave handkerchiefs, and gradually more appeared along the street, the white cloths fluttering in the cold wind. Look how the women are getting into this. I didn't expect that. A band passed, and the noise became intense, the waving all the more ardent. Then a company of goose-stepping soldiers in gray uniforms marched through, followed by 8 big tanks. The tanks made a terrific noise on the cobblestone street. The drivers stood with their shoulders above the open turrets. They didn't wave, didn't smile, but they looked exultant. Behind the panzers came a troop of Hitler Youth in their winter uniforms, long black pants, black coats with red swastika armbands, black caps and gloves. They didn't goose-step, but they were skillful marchers, and their devotion was clear in their stern faces, their tunneled eyes. More soldiers in trucks came after that, and then half-tracks, a squadron of men on motorcycles, artillery pulled by giant horses, and Nazi party leaders in touring cars. Elder Thomas hadn't wanted Elder Meekum to see too much of this kind of thing. Elder Thomas loved the Germans in the branches and the good people he met in their homes, people who saved their money to attend operas and concerts, people who loved books and nature, spent their spare time in art museums or strolling in the woods. He didn't know how to explain this seeming madness for weapons and military pomp. "So, we meet again." Elder Thomas spun to his left, but he already knew the voice. It was Kellermann, the Gestapo agent. "Good day, Herr Kellermann. Heil Hitler!" He gave a quick Nazi salute. "Heil Hitler," Elder Thomas said, and he raised his arm. "How is it that you let our flag pass you by at the beginning and didn't show it proper respect?" He had chosen to speak in German today, and he was looking at Elder Meekum. "Someone saw you do this and came to tell me. I was very surprised. I said, surely this isn't true." "We weren't certain what we should do," Elder Thomas said. Suddenly Kellermann's tone changed. "I don't want to hear this again. You know exactly what you should do." "We will salute from this day on," Elder Thomas said, and he tried to sound friendly, not defensive. "Do it now. Show me. Say Heil Hitler." Elder Thomas raised his arm, but Kellermann said, "Not you. I want Herr Meekum to do it." Kellermann looked up at Elder Meekum with hatred in his eyes. He had obviously been waiting for this moment. Elder Meekum didn't raise his arm, and he didn't answer. "Do it," Elder Thomas said. But Elder Meekum shook his head. So Elder Thomas turned to Kellermann. "I'll talk to him. He hasn't been in Germany very long. He doesn't understand all your customs, but he'll change his mind once I explain." "You are lying, Herr Thomas." He looked at Elder Meekum. "I want to hear you say Heil Hitler, and see you salute." Elder Meekum shook his head, slowly and resolutely. Kellermann pulled his nightstick loose from his belt. "Do it now," he said in English. "No, I don't have to do that." Suddenly the nightstick flashed, backhanded, directly into Elder Meekum's face, catching him across the bridge of his nose. Elder Meekum spun away and grabbed his face. Another slashing blow caught him across the head, and he fell to his knees. Elder Thomas dropped to the ground, grabbed his companion's shoulder, and shielded him with his body from more blows. "Please don't," he pleaded. "That's enough." Elder Thomas heard Elder Meekum whisper, "If I get up, I'll kill him. Hold me down." Elder Thomas tightened his grip. "What did he say?" Kellermann demanded. "He's sorry. He said that he is sorry." "You lie. I heard him say kill." No, he wouldn't say that." "Get up, both of you." Elder Thomas stood up, but Elder Meekum was still on all fours. "Get up, I said." Suddenly he thrust the toe of his boot hard into Elder Meekum's side. Elder Meekum took the blow with a grunt, but he hardly moved. Elder Thomas knelt next to him again. "Stand up," he was pleading, and then to Kellermann, "He'll get up now." And slowly Elder Meekum did climb to his feet. Blood was running down the sides of his nose onto his chin. He wiped his hand through it, smearing it across his lip and cheek. But then he stared into Kellermann's eyes, looking more defiant than hurt. "Apologize to me, and to my flag," Kellerman said in German. He looked excited, tense, ready to use the stick again. Elder Meekum said nothing, but Elder Thomas only let a second or two pass before he said, "He doesn't understand you." And then in English, "Elder, you've got to say you're sorry." Elder Meekum just stood his ground, his jaw set. "Just say you're sorry." "Es tut mir leid," Elder Meekum finally said. But his tone said, "Just try it again." Kellerman looked confused. He had clearly not expected this concession, however insincere. "I'm not finished with you," he said. His thick lips tightened into a grim frown, but it all seemed an act. Under the surface was an obvious well of weakness. "You think you can defy the Führer, but you cannot. My leaders tell me you are harmless boys, but I know better. They will listen to me now. You haven't heard the last from me." He turned on his heels and marched away. "I should have broken his jaw," Elder Meekum said. "Come on, Elder, that's not what we're here for. I'm not going to bow down to that guy the way you did." Elder Thomas was frustrated, scared for what might happen if Elder Meekum couldn't learn from this. But he was also ashamed of himself. He wished that he hadn't groveled before Kellerman. "It broke my nose," Elder Meekum said. "Are you sure?" "Doesn't matter, it's been broken before." Elder Thomas took his arm and turned to him. "Oh, man, the back of your head is cut too. You're bleeding pretty bad." He reached in his back pocket for a handkerchief and handed it to Elder Meekum, who dabbed at his face and then at his head. "We better get home as fast as we can. Come on." Elder Meekum took a couple of steps and then said, "Don't walk too fast. My side hurts." "I'll bet he broke your ribs." "Maybe." He was leaning forward, his eyes squinted, and his jaw clamped tight. Elder Thomas heard a little grunt with each step he took. "Do you want to lean on me?" "No, let's just get home." "Can you ride a bike?" "I don't know." "All right, then. We'll leave our bikes and take the streetcar. We'll go back to the apartment, and then I'll get in touch with President Wood. He'll know what to do." Chapter 5. 3 weeks later, Elder Thomas received a new companion, Elder Roland Sawyer from Los Angeles. By then, President Wood had transferred Elder Meekum to Stuttgart. Elder Thomas liked Elder Sawyer well enough, but he was a quiet young man, and not half as interesting as Elder Meekum had always been. For a couple of months, Elder Thomas did his work carefully and quietly, and he stayed away from Bruder Goldfarb. Finally, however, he decided he needed a new suit, and he had no reason not to go to his friend for that. When the elders visited Brother Goldfarb, they found an emaciated, broken man. He had lost almost all his business, and he had very little hope that things would get better. He missed his wife and daughter desperately. The elders prayed with him and wished him their best, and they promised to visit his wife, to bring him back word how she was doing. When they visited Sister Goldfarb, however, they found a woman every bit as disillusioned as her husband. She was doubting everything, even God. The missionaries returned for the suit, but they were careful what they said. At least they could tell Brother Goldfarb that his wife was all right. They didn't tell him how the children in the neighborhood called his little daughter a filthy Jew. On the day after their second visit to Brother Goldfarb's shop, the elders got up early, as always. Each took a spit bath at the sink in their room, and then they put in their morning study hour. Elder Thomas was trying to read the Old Testament in German, and he was struggling with that, but he had his mind well focused on the chore when a rap came on the door. It was the time of day when the district president, Elder Dunford, sometimes stopped by, and so Elder Thomas wasn't surprised at the knock. But when he opened the door, he saw President Mize from the Frankfurt branch. "I must talk to you," he said, and he stepped forward. Elder Thomas shut the door and then invited President Mize to sit down, but President Mize stood where he was. "There's something you must know," he said. "Bruder Goldfarb was questioned last night, and beaten." "What? Who did it?" "That's not for me to say, and that's not important. It was the Gestapo, wasn't it?" Suddenly President Mize's voice sharpened. "It was you, Elder Thomas. It was you who got him in trouble. You have been going there even though I told you not to." "Yes, but only to—" Elder Thomas couldn't believe this. An avalanche of guilt was coming down on him. Why should they beat him? "I don't know that. I only know that a Gestapo agent was at my door early this morning. He warned me, if members of our church contact Goldfarb again, we won't be allowed to hold our meetings. We'll be disbanded, and I could be arrested." "Was it Kellerman? Is that who came to your door?" "That's not your concern." Elder Thomas saw what was happening. "Elder Meekum and I had trouble with an agent named Kellerman," he said, "but his leaders won't let him arrest us because we're Americans. He must be trying to get at us some other way." President Mize was a stout man, a builder by trade. He had a square, solid face, but he also had a kindly smile with a flashing gold tooth when he was in the mood to smile. Now his lips were pressed tightly together. He pointed a finger at Elder Thomas. "You have no idea the trouble you are causing. You must never go there again. Bruder Goldfarb might have been killed." "President Mize, people are being beaten for no reason. Do you defend that? Do you think it's right?" President Mize spoke with care. "Bruder, I haven't said I like everything that is happening, but I must deal with reality. To the Nazis, Bruder Goldfarb is not one of us. He is a Jew. We must not do anything that will bring harm to him, and we must protect the church. That's simply how things are. We'll stay away from him now. I promise you that." "Be certain you do," President Mize said, and then he left. Chapter 6. "Runners, take your marks." Wally turned and walked back to his starting holes. "Good luck, Wally," he heard his friend Mel call out. As the runners began to place their feet in their marks and crouch for the start, quiet fell over the field. Wally leaned forward and held his arms out for balance. "Get set!" Wally tensed. He felt the presence of the runners near him, but his focus was down the track as though he were looking through a tunnel. No one was going to beat him to that first turn. Crack! The gun fired and Wally burst from his marks. He jumped into the lead so suddenly that the other runners were already out of his vision as he angled toward the inside of the track and headed for the corner. He took the first turn cruising, the chopping sound of the cinders the only evidence that he was even touching the ground. Hold back, he tried to tell himself, but he couldn't contain the energy that was pulling him into the backstretch. As he came out of the corner, the whistle in his ears disappeared, and he knew that the wind was with him now, and he was still floating, still running without strain. "Take it easy, Wally, take it easy," he heard Coach Morse calling from across the track, and he knew the man was right. But he wanted that record. He would give everything he had and then gut out the finish, no matter what it cost him. He could hear no one behind him, and he wasn't about to glance back and foul up the stride he had going. But as he neared the end of the backstretch and started into the second turn, he knew for the first time that he had pushed himself too hard, too early. The pain hit him suddenly. His legs had turned heavy, and as he came out of the turn and picked up the sound of the wind again, he felt his stride break. He almost stumbled, but he muscled his way through and tried to thrust his legs to find his rhythm again. He heard everyone screaming, "Keep going, Wally, keep going, push!" It was all as though he were swimming under water, with the sound of the people out there somewhere above the surface. Still, he tried to respond. He pressed harder, but everything was shutting down, and now he heard the footsteps, heard the crowd noise intensify, and then he felt a runner coming alongside him. He could sense the height of him, saw his long arms swinging. Wally reached for something more and held his own, and the two battled forward, both losing speed, but straining to match each other step for step. And then Wally let go. With 20 yards to run, his body simply surrendered. He commanded himself not to give up, but his stride faltered. Almost at a stop, he took a final step across the line as another runner slipped by him and took second. Wally dropped to his knees. He fell forward, scraping his forearms into the track, and then dropped his face onto his arms. He didn't care whether he cut himself. He sucked for air and waited for some relief from the sickness. He wanted to vomit, wanted to do it right there on the track and end the agony. But two people had hold of him, grasping him by the arms and around the middle. They were pulling him up. "Don't," Wally managed to grunt. "Walk it off," Mel was saying. "You'll be all right." "Leave me alone," Wally tried to say, but nothing came out. He bent forward and breathed for maybe a minute, and then he found the energy to pull himself free. He stumbled a few steps forward, bent over and put his hands on his knees, then took deep breaths until he could walk to the end of the bleachers. There, he stepped underneath, grabbed a metal strut and bent over again. He felt the convulsion in his stomach, the acid in his nose, but a second later he already felt better. He spat on the ground, waited to see whether there would be more. When Wally stepped out from under the bleachers, he saw his coach coming. "Let me have a look at you," Coach Morse said. "How bad is it?" "Not bad. I just got scratched." The illness was gone now, and the blood wasn't that important. "I've got a first aid kit out here," the coach said. "Walk back to—" "No, I'll just go shower." He started to walk away, but it was only then that he realized he had made a decision. He stopped and turned back. "Coach, I'm quitting." "What?" "I'm quitting track. I don't like it. I can't do it." "Wally, you went out too fast. But if you keep training hard, you'll hang on for those final yards and beat those guys. You have a good shot at the city championship." "No, I can't do it. I'm sorry." And Wally walked away. He didn't go back to the track for his warm-ups or his gym bag. He just walked into the locker room. He wanted to get away from the school as fast as he could.
This completes the first CD. Please insert CD number 2 to continue with the program.